So I've been on the news twice this week, twice in the last week.
Okay.
That's when you know it's bad. This is like the local news indicator.
Yeah.
Right?
So yeah.
When they're calling all the time, that's when it's the bottom.
Yeah, the phone ringing for you being summoned to do interviews, and then the phone ringing, when clients are starting to get a lot of calls from clients.
Yep.
Usually means there's volatility in the markets.
Well, for sure. But when the local news is calling on a story about markets, which they never cover, over the holidays they call because it's like a story on how to manage your Christmas spending. So more of a financial planning story.
Sure.
Or Thanksgiving, it was the price. What's the price of a Thanksgiving meal compared to last year? Kind of an inflation story. But when they want to talk markets, that's when you know, A, it's been bad, and B, you're probably not far from bottom. I remember they actually dragged me into the studio the day after Christmas in 2018. And it was the literal bottom because in 2019, Powell started getting easier on rates, and 2019 was ripping. But yeah, I would say we're not calling the bottom here, but there's a local news indicator that you could possibly use here.
Yeah, it's interesting that, after a year like last year too, where the year was really good as a whole, right? They don't call you on when the market's good at the end of the year, and they can have some talking points about why things were so good. You don't get called for that kind of stuff. It's
the analogy I always use is when the news covers like an airline, they don't say 1,000 flights landed safely today. They say 1 crashed. Right. It's never, if it bleeds, it leads. That's the focus. And it's just what people are interested in. And that's news. The regular stuff isn't news. So when the markets go up, it's not news.
Correct.
All right. It's been a minute, Ryan. We're going to have to address this. You ready to jump in and do this thing?
Yeah.
All right, let's do it. Okay. Welcome back to the Casual Friday Financial Insights podcast. I'm Brian Ullman, certified financial planner at Ford Financial Group, joined by Ryan Louie, also a financial advisor, certified financial planner here at Ford Financial Group. If you are new here, we use this podcast to address questions that we hear, kind of talk about what's going on, both market-wise and economically. If you haven't subscribed and you're watching this on YouTube, now's your chance to subscribe to the YouTube channel so you can catch these episodes in the future. If you're listening on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, subscribe on either of those so that way you don't miss these future updates. Although, if you are a subscriber and you're watching or listening to this and you're surprised because you may have missed the last episode or two, you didn't miss anything because we haven't done this since the end of the year when we were doing our outlook for last year. So, Ryan, we're in the middle of March. You still doing your New Year's resolution?
I can't even remember.
I can't even remember mine.
I can't remember it. So maybe that in itself probably tells you how long it's been since we did a podcast. Is that I can't even remember exactly what I said for my New Year's resolution.
Yeah, me neither.
It was probably having to still. I think it was seeing friends and family. Which I will say this. So spending more time with friends and family. We actually did do something this last weekend, which was with the people that I was thinking about when I said that a year plus ago. So, it's happening.
You're doing it.
Yeah, it's working a little bit.
I don't know what my New Year's resolution was. I'll go back and listen to the last episode, I guess, to find out and see if I've been doing it. I think some of it had to do with reading. I think
that sounds
sparingly. Right. Yeah. The New Year's resolution I had but didn't know was that I was going to start running more because I've been running a lot. Some of it's having to do with weightlifting injuries that I've got. So all I can do is run now, but yeah, I've got three 5Ks under my belt. I'm running another one this weekend and another 10K coming up. So
look at you.
Yeah. Who knows? I never thought that it would take me 47 years to become a runner, but I still don't think I'm a runner. I'm a guy who's running. I am not a runner. There are other people I pass by at 5 a.m. on the roads who look like runners and are going fast, and I'm just chugging along trying not to die.
As long as you enjoy it, though, I think that's if you get some enjoyment, I think people generally with running fall into pretty distinct camps. It's either you enjoy, I'm not saying you love, but like at least enjoy like getting out there. And then there's people that will say, I'll never run. And they have such disdain for running that it's not something that they'll do for exercise.
I think I'm enjoying the challenge
That's
because I
good.
suck.
Like you
I
said,
suck at it.
enjoy something out of it, right?
Yeah. Well, yeah, you have to, or else you won't do it. No, it's one of those like, oh, I'm a terrible runner. I should do more of this so I'm not terrible. That's kind of my approach.
I disdain running, and I used to be a runner for like well over a decade of my life.
Yes, you were. I thought you were weird.
You can't get me out there now. You just can't get me out there.
Yeah, well, that's what happens when you break each of your feet.
Yeah, that happens too.
Yeah, that's true. Okay. Well, so in our recap from the last episode, it's been 2.5 months. We started 2025. I think in our defense a little bit, in our world, January and February is like drinking from a fire hose. And now that we're into March, things usually calm down a little bit, but that certainly isn't the case. And if you're listening to this, it's no big surprise that markets have dropped to start the year. I do remember from our last episode that we were talking about how our outlook for the S&P 500, for example, was maybe mid to low single digits. And we were already there by the time we were in mid-February, which suggests, okay, if we really are going to be correct, that means we've already gotten a year's worth of what our projected returns were in like 6 weeks. So that means either we were really far off or there was some correcting that needed to go on. And unfortunately, I would have rather have been wrong than have a correction, but we're in the middle of a correction right now, are we not?
Right. Yeah, we know. We did say in the outlook that the expectation should have been for more volatility, and not to say that we knew when, and not to say we knew what the reasons were going to be. Part of that just came from the fact that 2024 had very little volatility, and so people needed to expect more. But again, we're seeing it. It was, yeah, you're right. Like in February, I was having annual meetings with clients, and I was going over more volatility, lower returns, and yet. We were sitting at the same pace that we were going out in 2024, which was, markets were moving up nicely. Everything was looking good. And so, it was kind of hard to say that when you were, again, 6 weeks into the year and things were just like they were in 2024. But then fast forward us another month and the volatility's here.
Yeah. I mean, we're moving up at like 2% a month on diverse portfolios, not just all stock, right? Stocks and bonds. And that's, if you extrapolate that out, that's a clip of a 24% annualized return. And we all knew that we weren't going to get 20 in a 60-40 portfolio. You're not going to get 24%. Something had to give. And of course, markets have been what's given. Let's check in a little bit and see where we are here. As we record this, this is kind of the early in the second week of March. We're taking a look, and this is a year-to-date look at things, and everything is negative year-to-date in 2025. The orange line is the Dow Jones Industrial Average. It's down nearly 2%. The S&P 500 is down 4 1/3. NASDAQ, as we're recording this, is down more than 6.5%. And I don't know if a lot of people listening know what the Russell 2000 index is. It's this small cap, small companies tend to be a little bit more volatile, down almost 8.5% year to date. Tech stocks, which is a lot of what's represented in the NASDAQ, is really what's getting the brunt because those were the high flyers for the last couple of years, right?
Yeah, we may have talked about this in the outlook. Some of what needed to happen for stocks, especially let's say the Mag 7, the large technology companies, to continue to give good returns, was that they were going to have a pretty perfect environment where things would have to be just like right in their favor to continue the run upwards. And given all the things that are happening right now, it's not the perfect environment for them. And so that needs to be correct. That's showing why I think that they're getting hit so hard right now.
Yep. I think an analogy that someone gave, I heard that I've stolen years ago was, like when it comes to rebalancing a portfolio, you need to rebalance. It's like trimming a tree, right? If you don't trim your tree, it takes less of a wind to come and knock it over because it's top heavy. it catches the wind, and so you need to rebalance so that way a wind doesn't come and blow you over. I would say that a lot of the market has been out of balance. It's been concentrated in 7 names. Those names are trading at multiples that are at nosebleed levels, and so it was almost like that top heavy tree, and a wind came by and blew it over. And in this case, it seems the wind is the uncertainty coming from the new president, the new administration in the White House, and specifically tariffs, right? Tariffs have been the catalyst more than anything on this.
Correct.
Yeah. And, we're not sitting here rendering an opinion on tariffs. I think they're inflationary. That's pretty widely accepted. And we're worried about inflation plus slowing growth. That's stagflation. That really is painful and hard to invest in. But who knows? The president announced at one point, I think it was in late February, the president announced tariffs after the market closed on a Friday and had repealed them after the market closed on a Monday. You do that enough times, though, and investors start to say, you know what? I don't want to be holding the bag when these things don't get repealed, and they call a timeout and head to the sidelines, especially at these high valuations. So, it's not like we've seen some real deterioration necessarily in the economy. A little bit of slowdown, but not so much that it would cause a full tilt correction. That's usually driven by fear, and that feels like this is a bit of a fear-driven sell-off. Would you agree with that, Ryan, or you have a different take?
I think, yeah, well, it's a fear-driven base. And again, I think it just has everything to do with the effects of where tariffs are. And markets don't like surprises. Markets don't like uncertainty. Those are all those things that will drive a market down. And because tariffs really are something that could be on 1 minute and off the next.
Yep.
Is really something hard to gauge, and that makes it, I think, even more unpredictable. It's not like because you can't start and stop it so easily. It does make things difficult to read. It's not like a tax policy where once they implement a tax policy, you kind of know it's going to be there for at least probably the rest of this administration, bleeds into the next one. It's there for a while. But these things with the tariffs are just moving, it seems like almost, every few days.
Yeah. In fact, this is one of the charts that you had chosen. This is an economic policy uncertainty index. And so this is uncertainty based on news, taxes, and forecaster disagreement. And this is an index of 100 represents the index of 100 represents the average from 1985 to 2009.
Yes.
So this index is an average of 122.
So this is like an index that's looking at the, negative news. Yep. It's looking at, tax implications that may or may not be being changed. And then it's economic forecasts that, are taking into consideration inflation and government spending. So This is not your, where is the economy? Is GDP going up or down necessarily? Right. That's not so much of what this is reading into. It's more specific to, again, news, taxes, and government spending and inflation.
Yeah, and forecasters, so this would be economists disagreeing on where we're headed, right?
Yes.
And it probably better to look at the dark line here, which is the 4-week moving average, because that takes out some of the noise. But no matter how you slice it, I don't know how scientific this is necessarily, but we are at uncertainty levels higher than we were during the global financial crisis and near where we were during the pandemic. So as high as it's been in 20 years.
Yeah, it's crazy to think that things are so bad right now. I mean, I guess things are uncertain, but things are definitely not as bad as where they were in the financial crisis. So you look at this and you're like, wow, this is worse than the global financial crisis in 2008. And it's like, well, let's pump some brakes here in terms of, correlating this to the markets at least.
Well, let's talk about what uncertainty is. If we're uncertain about where we're headed, or lots of people disagree about where we're headed, we could go in 100 different directions and no one really knows. It could be a good direction or a bad direction. We're talking uncertainty. So this is not economic policy bad news. This is economic policy uncertainty. But I would say investors can deal with bad news. Investors can deal with good news, but investors have a hard time when you can't predict what's going to happen next with any sense of kind of certainty. And that's where you get sell-offs, right? Is uncertainty causing this?
It's always the uncertainty. I tell clients all the time, the market hates one thing more than anything, is like an uncertain future. And that's purely what we're experiencing right now. You just can't put a pulse on to like what's going to happen next week, right? I really don't think anyone can guess, and so like that
Yep.
that's what the markets dislike the most.
Yeah. Well, it seems like even though the average for the last however many decades is 122 on this, and then you can't even really see the dotted line in there, we're regularly above the average, right? We're either below or, but we're never at the average. It just happens to be spiking here, and it's going to take some time to kind of figure this out. So what do we get when we have uncertainty, right? We get pullbacks. And so we've talked before about pullbacks. And I think what's been wild these last couple of years is how serene everything has been. Now, don't get me wrong. We had a presidential election last year. The world is crazy, but markets haven't been. And last year we had, so this chart shows the number of 5% pullbacks that we have on the S&P 500 every year going back to 1980. The average is 4 or 5%. If you watch this ever or listen to this ever, you'll know that we have referenced this chart more than a few times. You can't have a half of a 5% pull, right? You either pull back 5% or don't, but the average is somewhere between 4 and 5. And we've had 5 total over the course of 2023 and 2024. So well below average. It has been smooth sailing for these last couple of years. This year, we've already had a 5% pullback. And we're
this is the whole idea of like 2 steps forward, 1 step back. Clients constantly talk about, the market, can you move the market? It's like up to one day, down the next. Well, over a longer period of time, over the course of a year, that's what happens. You're going to have the market go up, and then it has a 5% pullback, and it goes up, and it has a 5% pullback. But yeah, you're right. Yeah, it's been really quiet the last few years, and overall. Again, last few years overall, we're basically just above the average of what you have in 1 year.
Right. So if we revert to the mean, I mean, I could very easily see. Now, don't get me wrong. The average is averaging out years like 2020 and 2022, where we had 5% pullbacks in each of those years. So the average is kind of deceiving because you're either well below or well above. I don't know that we'll be well above, but it wouldn't surprise me if we were near average this year. And we're kind of already headed in that direction. A correction is a drop of 10% from the peak, whatever you're looking at. And we're definitely hitting. And we tend to look at the S&P 500 because I think it's a better way to look at things here. But the NASDAQ is in correction territory. It's had a 10% pullback here so far this year. It's not a bear market would be a 20% pullback. We have only had one 10% pullback in the S&P 500 in the last 2.5 years. That's crazy, Ryan. I mean, we're talking about well below average and 5% pullbacks. We didn't have a 10% pullback last year. Zero. None.
And this is why I think it's harder for clients to swallow what's going on, right? Because again, when you don't have volatility for a long period of time, you get very accustomed to everything's easy. Don't have to worry about anything. We get like, it's almost like it's just when markets are like that, then even the smallest blip starts to scare people.
Yep, absolutely. And we're in a blip, and I would say you're talking 2 steps forward, 1 step back. This year could be one of those. It's 2 steps forward, 1.5 steps back.
Oh, totally.
Really, like it could be a very bumpy ride. Going back to this uncertainty chart that you've got, we've got a lot of uncertainty. We're not in a recession right now, but we could be in the next 12 months. And that can lead to a lot of this, where, we have an average of a little bit more than a 10% pullback a year. We could very easily hit 2 or 3 this year, right?
Yeah. And
let's say tariffs come off and Trump in April says, no, never mind. We're friends with Canada again. Markets race ahead, and then we're into the next fight and markets pull back another 10%. I mean, that very easily could happen.
Yes.
Whether it's being driven by the administration and the president, whether it's being driven by whatever Congress is up to and they're passing budgets and government shutdowns, could be the Federal Reserve just saying
that's what I was going to say. We're the Fed is taking a back seat, to something that we've been talking about for years now on this podcast.
Yep.
We've been so focused on the Fed for a couple of years, and now it seems as if they're kind of a little bit more forgotten today, but they definitely could play into this later down the year as well.
Well, sure. Well, they meet next week. So start there. They're not going to meet in April. They'll meet again in May. Futures are starting to suggest that they're not going to cut this month. They're not going to do that. There is a possibility they cut in May, but then more of a likelihood over the summer. We were chatting with some of the guys from JP Morgan this morning, and their idea, the Fed rate cut projections are somewhere between about 0.5% and 0.75% this year, which would be 0.75% rate cuts. But what that's really reflecting is people either predicting 7 or 0, right? And this is somewhere in between. If the Fed is cutting 2 or 3 percentage points, we're deep in a recession at that point.
Yes.
And if they're not, it's because we still have pesky inflation and maybe tepid growth, but not a recession. I don't know any of these things, whether it's Congress, the president, global politics,
geopolitics.
Yeah, exactly. Or the Federal Reserve. Any of these could cause another 10% pullback. It'll get us to 10% on the S&P 500, and we may have a couple of them, which would be a rough ride. And one of the things that correlates here is that, you can see when we have a lot of 10% pullbacks, it doesn't tend to be a good year for the S&P 500. You can look on the gold bar here, and when we have more 10% pullbacks is where we have the S&P not having a great year. It doesn't necessarily mean it's negative, but it means it's rough and returns are pretty tepid.
Yeah, I mean, you look back here, like going back to starting from the right hand side, the times that we had 4% or 10% pullbacks. That was 2022. That was a bad year. 2020 was COVID year, right?
It was a positive year, but it was a hell of a rough ride.
Yeah. And the time that there was 8 was the financial crisis, right? There's these are not good markets. These are the markets where it could pull back 10% in a week, right? When things are
for sure
at its worst, the news are at its worst. People are worried. And the market falls like that in a matter of a week, and then it comes back, and then more news comes out bad, and then you have another week like that.
It's whipsaw.
Kind of pullbacks.
Yep, it's whipsaw. Well, and so this is looking at annual returns in the S&P 500 and pullbacks, and you can see though, even though we don't necessarily reach the 10% level, or maybe sometimes don't even reach the 5% level, there is a pullback from the peak every single year. It doesn't go straight up and to the right. You're being lied to by somebody if you think that's how these things work. So far this year through March 11th, this is run March 11th, so this is through March 10th. So this is through Monday. S&P pullback is 9%. We're down a total of 5 through yesterday, but we're down. How are we doing? Hold on, I'm gonna go back to. Let me see here.
Still down.
Let's see S&P. Let's get back here.
Market's slightly up for today.
S&P's up a tick. Okay, so maybe we're not at 10% just yet. But the fact remains that we're down 9 through the running of this report. We've had that pullback. We were down 8 last year, and that was a phenomenal year. We were down 10 the year before. That was a good year. It's you go back to 1980, and yes, there are years that are bad. The tech wreck is particularly bad, of 3 negative years in a row. I mean, goodness, better to rip off the Band-Aid and eat it in 1 year, I feel like, than have like 2000, 2001, 2002.
That was such a different circumstance, though, right? But just the bubble that we were in with the whole .com and everything, everything technology related. I know that there's some talk of the Mag 7 being way overextended.
Sure,
and then they are big. I mean, they are important, but we're seeing some of the effects of how much they're down, and yet some of the broader markets still hanging in there.
But the tech bubble was like, okay, we have this internet. We think it's going to make money for somebody somehow, but we don't know. And you get like a pets.com, these companies that don't make any money, but had these crazy valuations. Right now, that the Mag 7 is like Apple and Microsoft and Google. These companies print money. So their valuations are too high, but it's not like they're just fake. But
And
also keep in mind,
you didn't have a 9/11 and a recession
yes,
in 2022 right after. They were, events that were not even necessarily tied to each other happened year after year after year to create that 3-year period that was really bad.
9/11.
Again,
Enron accounting scandal, right? We had Enron. Like, I mean, there was a series of calamities going on in the early 2000s. It was just like the pump was primed. You look at the S&P over 5 years, never returned less than 20% in a year. Like that's a crazy run. Of course, there's got to be some runoff, and that's excess. And then you add in all these other things. So we're not saying that that's going to go on again here, but you get these pullbacks, right? And more often than not, you get a pullback, but you still have a positive year on the S&P.
You have to live with the pullbacks to be able to get the gains that you wanted in the stock market. That's what this really boils down to. And the last 2 years are probably pretty representative of that. I mean, no one knows. Yes, we're down 9% last year. From the peak. Last year was down 8 and 10 before that.
Yeah.
And of course, that's where we are today, down 9%. Could be larger. In the future.
Yeah.
But you look at the last 2 years. And with those pullbacks, we had very, very good returns at the end of the year. And you kind of have to just ride out these volatile times, and hope for the best.
Yeah, I mean, markets go down 1 out of every 5 years, basically.
Yep.
Here's
the one thing we haven't talked about too. On the flip side of everything we're talking about stocks is the bonds. And the bonds have been much more questionable the last few years just because of rising interest rates with the Fed. 2022, which was the last bad stock market, was also horrendously bad for the bonds. And so that year, the last bad year we had, both stocks and bonds were headed downwards at the same time. So you really had no protection. This year, it's working out to be much different, though, because you actually have the bonds up for the year. And so for those that have some kind of balanced portfolio, let's call it 60-40 per portfolio.
Right.
Yes, your 60% stocks are maybe down, but your 40% in bonds are up. And so that's at least giving some balance to the portfolio and keeping things.
It took me a second to pull it up, but this is what you've got going on. So this is annual stock and bond returns. Man, the bonds have just stunk for a while, really, truly. Like 2022, there was no guy. It was just all terrible. And then the rebound in stocks came in 2023 and 4, but the bonds didn't rebound at all. In fact, bonds were only up 1% last year. But this year, like you're saying, stocks down 4. Or the S&P 500 is down 4, and the aggregate bond index up 3. Probably poised to do even better if interest rates get cut, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, I mean, think about where we are. If you're up 3%, let's just call it even all the way through at the end of March. You have 9 months left, and all you're doing is picking up interest, right? I mean, you're going to sit with a decent return on the bond side this year.
Yeah, well, the average, 30, 40-year average for the U.S. ag is 5%. Yep. So, I think it's very likely, especially after several years in a row of being below average, it wouldn't surprise me one bit even if rates stayed steady that we got at or above average on the bond side.
For sure. Yeah. I'd agree with that.
Okay. Well, we kind of covered a lot of ground. It feels good to be back, like talking this out, taking some look at some charts, having some perspective. There's something to talk about now, unfortunately, right? Over these last little bit, I feel like the boy who cried recession because I kept showing these charts about everything was extended, and here we are. I never thought it would be tariffs that would be the thing causing the problem, but I guess when Trump said he wanted to do tariffs on day one, we all should have listened to him.
When you talk about recession too, that's actually a good point that was mentioned in that research report. When people, there's like kind of 2 ways in which a recession could happen. You go through kind of your normal business cycle gets too long. And then, naturally you just kind of have this like lull, and it causes a recession because again, things have been good for so long for the economy. Sure. So that's one natural way for it to happen. Yep. And then the other way it happens is some kind of, I don't want to necessarily call it like a black swan, but like, something out of the norm, like a financial issue that really disrupts the economy happens. COVID, for example, right? Or the housing bust. This time right now, it feels as if if we were to have a recession, that financial problem issue is going to be the tariffs, right? It wasn't something that we thought necessarily was going to happen, but it could be the issue that leads it in.
Yeah, getting back to that tree analogy, the conditions were right. And so all it took was the catalyst to tip it. And so I would say those recession conditions were there. And if we do find ourselves with a couple of negative quarters of GDP, it's because it got tipped into it with instability caused by tariffs or whatever else is going on. So the conditions are right, and then you get the catalyst, and then that's the spark that causes it to go. So I don't know. We'll see. We'll do this more often than once a quarter, Ryan, so we could talk this through as things develop this year, right? If you've listened this long, congratulations. You are one of the first people to hear about a webinar that we've got for clients going on March 18th. When the market closes at 1:00, we'll have one of the economists from First Trust coming on talking with clients. If you're interested in joining us for that, you can email us at info@forwardfg.com, and we'll send you the link so you can register for that and check it out. Ryan, what's on your mind these days? Other than recessions and pullbacks.
All the market news. So a couple of weeks ago, I did a card show in Los Angeles with my boys. And so I told this to Brian. And so this was my first time being it was a Pokemon card show. I grew up collecting sports cards, and as a kid, you're always like, oh, it'd be so awesome to be on the other side of the table at a card show and be the vendor and sell people stuff. And so this was my first opportunity that I was able to do this, and it was like a really good experience to be on the other side of the table. Kind of, it's just fun, buying, selling, trading, and the boys were there to help me out, which was a great experience. They had a ton of fun. They're 10 and 12. I can see us doing this probably for a few more years, and still have fun doing it. Maybe as the boys get older, they grow out of it, but it was overall like a great experience to spend time with them.
That's cool.
Again, give them an opportunity to like interact with people on like kind of the business side of things. They did have to negotiate a little bit when people came up to the table. And so overall, it was something that for our first time, it was a home run, and thank goodness, because it then leaves a good taste in my mouth to do this again sometime down the road.
Well, when you can do something that's fun, that you're interested in, that's good family time, that the kids enjoy, like that's a win all the way around.
Absolutely.
You don't hit those home runs every day with every excursion,
Yes. Right. Yeah. What's up with you?
Well, we did something similar. We went out of town. We went to the Indian Wells tennis tournament just last week. And so it was cool. I'd never been to a big time tennis tournament, and nobody in our family had, but it was a great time. All four of us in our house play tennis, and some more than others, but we were able to see all the big tennis players get really close. Kids got a lot of signatures. The place down in Indian Wells, which is next to Palm Desert, is immaculate. It was a great, like, professional sporting experience. I would say it was a little bit like when I went to SoFi Stadium for the first time to watch a football game. It was like you're blown away by the facilities. Same thing here, except it was all tennis. It was a lot of fun being surrounded by people who are as into tennis as you are. Like it was like a club meetup, right? Everybody was in on it, and no shade, Ryan. Nobody said anything about pickleball. It was all tennis the whole time.
To those that aren't familiar with Indian Wells, it's such a well-run tournament. Again, the facilities are nice. Every top player, if they are able to play, not due to injury, is going to play at this tournament. And so it is nice that it's really kind of in our backyard. It's considered by some the fifth major of the tennis tournament. So you have the four majors, but this is kind of deemed the fifth major just because it is so big. The other tournaments, around the world, sometimes will draw some of the top players, but not all the top players. Right. So this is we're very fortunate to have this nearby.
It was beautiful. I mean, it was a little bit cold, but it was beautiful, right? You're in the desert, but you're kind of nestled against those desert mountains, palm trees, sunshine. Like it was great. It's easy to get to. I mean, we just drove. It took us 10 minutes. We parked. Parking's free. It was just a great experience. And so that's what's been on our minds is taking the leap, driving down in the desert, which is 5.5 hours away, taking the kids out of school for a few days, which we don't do typically, and going and doing this. So I thought it was a good time. Hopefully we'll do it again in our future, but that's what we've been up to lately. So
awesome.
Okay, Ryan, we're going to leave it there because we're going to do another one of these in, I don't want to say in a week, but probably before the month is out. I think as we get back to our normal schedule and the tax season craziness and 1099s are behind us, we'll have more time to chat markets and kind of update. So, again, if you've listened this long and you haven't subscribed, I don't even know what you're doing at this point. So if Apple Podcasts, you can subscribe, Spotify, YouTube, all the places. If you have questions, email us at info@forwardfg.com. Maybe we can try and tackle one of your questions in one of the subsequent episodes that we'll do here in the future. So until then, Ryan,
I'll see you next time.
Good luck. Yeah.